Welcome to this account of one of the most unsettling mysteries ever recorded in the American Northwest. Before we begin, take a moment to drop in the comments where you're listening from and the exact time of day or night you've joined us. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide these forgotten stories travel. In the winter of 1883, 27 men set out into the remote forests of Montana's Bitterroot Range. The logging and fur trades were booming, drawing ambitious frontiersmen into the wilderness with promises of wealth. Their base camp, built near what is now called Blackwater Creek, was meant to sustain them for an entire season of trapping and hunting. Records show they were well supplied, highly skilled in frontier survival, and under the command of a man with decades of experience. Yet, despite every advantage, only 9 men would ever emerge from those woods. 18 vanished, no bodies ever found, no clear explanation ever offered. And the 9 who survived never spoke openly of what truly happened during those 3 months of isolation. What we know now is pieced together from fragments of journals, scattered newspaper clippings, territorial records, and whispered testimonies shared only years later, when men thought no one was listening. The official report, published in the Montana Territorial Register on April 17, 1883, blamed the disappearances on winter hardships and possible conflict with native tribes. But the weather that year was mild, and the local Salish had long maintained peaceful relations with traders and trappers. Clearly, something else happened in those woods, something the survivors went to great lengths to conceal. This is the story of the Blackwater Creek hunting camp and the dark secret that has remained buried for nearly a century. In 1882, Mill Creek, Montana Territory, was little more than a rugged settlement. A general store, a sawmill, 2 saloons, and a scattering of rough wooden homes and shops stood at the center of a valley hemmed in by mountains. Men came here chasing fortunes in lumber, furs, and sometimes gold. The town swelled during the warmer months, then thinned as winter closed in. But some saw opportunity in the cold, when the pelts of fur-bearing animals were at their thickest and most valuable. Jeremiah Holcomb was one of those men. At 53, he had spent most of his life pushing deeper into the territories. Born in Pennsylvania, he worked as a surveyor before carving out a reputation as a seasoned organizer of hunting and trapping expeditions. By 1882, he was respected throughout Mill Creek and beyond, a meticulous planner, a strict disciplinarian, and a leader known for bringing his men home alive. The Mill Creek Gazette from November of that year carried his advertisement: 3 months' work, equal share of profits. Previous wilderness experience required. Inquire at Wilson's General Store. According to store ledgers preserved in the archives, 26 men were eventually chosen. They ranged in age from 22 to 48. Many had worked with Holcomb before or came recommended by trusted associates. A few newcomers brought valuable skills or equipment to the venture. Their mission was primarily commercial, trapping fur-bearing animals and scouting logging sites for a spring cutting season. On December 3, 1882, the expedition set out from Mill Creek. 27 men, 8 wagons, and enough provisions to last well into spring. Territorial records preserve their names: Jeremiah Holcomb, Augustus Reed, Samuel Perkins, Thomas Fletcher, William Norton, Benjamin Lewis, Charles Winston, Jacob Miller, Isaac Thompson, Frank Wilson, Daniel Roberts, Joseph Davis, Henry Adams, George Stewart, Edward Collins, Michael Williams, Robert Taylor, John Anderson, James Martin, David Brown, Richard Evans, Christopher Hughes, Paul Mitchell, Peter Schmidt, Frederick Cooper, Howard Griffin, and Eli Watson. Of those men, only 9 would return: Holcomb, Reed, Perkins, Fletcher, Norton, Lewis, Winston, Miller, and Thompson. The journey to their winter camp took 11 days. They followed familiar trails, crossed the Clark Fork River, and then pressed northwest into wilder country. The terrain grew harsher, dense forests of pine and fir, steep ridges, narrow valleys carved by fast-running streams. Holcomb's journal notes that they saw no other people after the 4th day, though they passed the ruins of old trapper cabins and the occasional abandoned prospector's hole. On December 14, they arrived at their chosen site, a sheltered valley where 3 streams converged into the dark waters Holcomb named Blackwater Creek, stained by tannins from the surrounding trees. From a practical standpoint, it was an ideal location: fresh water, natural protection from the wind, visible game trails in the snow, and enough flat ground to support a large, well-supplied camp. They wasted no time establishing their winter quarters. The men were divided into crews, some cutting timber, others clearing ground, while a few began raising the first cabins. Olam's journal, dated December 15th. Reckles' work moves along well. Each man contributes as he's able. Weather remains fair. First cabin nearly finished by sundown. Expect to have all men sheltered within the week if conditions hold. By December 21st, the camp stood nearly complete. 7 cabins formed a rough circle, with a larger structure in the center serving as both mess hall and meeting place. Around it, the men built a sharpened log stockade, not for protection from other people, but to ward off predators and prevent pack animals from wandering. Such precautions were standard in frontier encampments. Jeremiah Holcomb imposed order right away. Every man had his role: hunting, trapping, camp upkeep, and guard duty rotated on a strict schedule. His journal from this period shows the meticulous habits that earned him respect: careful inventories of food and ammunition, records of daily hunting yields, maps of trap lines stretching outward from the camp, and precise notes on weather conditions. For the first 5 weeks, life was routine. The men settled comfortably into their assignments. Trap lines were checked daily. Hunters returned with deer, elk, and even an occasional moose. Pelts stacked up quickly: beaver, marten, fox, and the highly prized river otter that thrived along the creeks. Holcomb's journal entries are almost boring at this stage: reports on game, notes on snow conditions, and mentions of small quarrels. On January 2nd, 1883, he wrote Norton and Schmidt quarreled over cards. Stepped in before it turned violent. Otherwise, spirits remain high. Trapping lines productive. Expect first shipment of pelts to be ready by month's end. Nothing yet hinted at the horror creeping toward their camp. The men weren't entirely cut off from civilization. Holcomb had organized a system to send pelts back to a trading post, a 5-day horseback ride, where they could trade for supplies and relay messages to Mill Creek. The first trip was scheduled for late January, with Wilson and Evans chosen as couriers. But they never made that journey. January 21st, 1883 marks the first shadow over the expedition. Holcomb's journal entry for that day reads: Reed reports strange discovery along Northern Ridge. Claims to have found abandoned camp, no sign of men. Odd markings carved into trees nearby. Plan to investigate if weather allows. The next day's entry was brief. Snowstorm prevented travel. Reed uneasy. Claims to hear voices in the woods during night watch. Likely exhaustion. Assigned him to camp duty for 3 days rest. But 3 days later, Holcomb noted a troubling development. Reed still speaks of voices. Claims they call his name. No fever, no physical illness, yet his mind unsettled. Other men avoiding his company. Then, on January 26th, more unsettling reports came in. Stewart and Brown, checking the northern trap lines, returned shaken. They described hearing whispers that seemed to follow them, always close yet never clear enough to understand. Both were seasoned woodsmen, men not known for fanciful tales. Holcomb ordered that no one travel in pairs anymore. From that day forward, every man was to move in groups of 3. On January 27th, the expedition faced its first loss. Schmidt failed to return from his trap line. Holcomb sent Cooper and Mitchell to search, but by nightfall, they came back empty-handed. The journal for January 28th reads: Cooper and Mitchell found Schmidt's traps untouched. No sign of him. Tracks in snow strange. Possibly bear, though pattern unlike any I've seen. Unease spreads through camp. Then, on January 29th, another blow. Cooper was gone. Mitchell claimed they had separated briefly while searching again for Schmidt. Cooper never returned. When Mitchell called out for Cooper, there was no reply. Another search party went out but returned empty-handed. 3 men were now gone. Holcomb ordered all trapping activities to be done strictly in pairs. No man was to leave camp alone under any circumstances. By February 1st, the tone of his journal had shifted. The entries, once methodical, began to betray an undercurrent of alarm. Men were reporting sounds from the forest at night, described not as animals or wind, but as voices without words. Holcomb tried to explain it away as the wind passing through rock formations, producing strange acoustics. Nevertheless, he doubled the night watch rotations. A grim pattern had begun to emerge. Men were vanishing 1 or 2 at a time, without a struggle, without a cry. Most often when briefly separated from their companions. The psychological toll on the survivors was severe. Holcomb's journal speaks of sleepless nights, bitter arguments, and what he called nervous disorders spreading through the camp. February 3rd marks another chilling entry. Mitchell was found about a mile from camp, disoriented and confused, claiming he had been led astray by familiar voices. A medical examination showed no injuries but severe exhaustion. When questioned further, Mitchell rambled about the door in the cave, but became violently agitated. Holcomb sedated him with whiskey and laudanum. From there, the situation spiraled. Holcomb's entries become sporadic, his normally precise handwriting devolving into a shaky scrawl. On February 5th he recorded, "Mitchell found dead this morning. No sign of injury. His body cold, his face frozen in terror. Men insisted on burial outside the camp despite frozen ground. 4 hours to dig grave. Roberts led prayers. Morale at lowest point. That same day Watson, Hughes, and Taylor failed to return from a hunting expedition. Griffin and Anderson volunteered to form a search party. Holcomb, hesitant, approved despite the onset of darkness. Neither the hunters nor the search party returned by midnight. The camp was now down 8 men. Those remaining refused to sleep in their separate cabins, insisting instead on gathering together in the central hall. Holcomb agreed, if only to preserve what morale remained. A significant gap follows in the journal between February 5th and February 18th. When entries resume, they are radically different. Dates disappear. The once neat handwriting becomes hurried, uneven. One undated entry reads simply, "They watch from between the trees. They are not what they appear to be." Another 7 gone. They went for water. The creek is only 200 yards away. No struggle, no cries. They simply vanished between one moment and the next. Those remaining refused to speak of it, as if silence might protect us. The final entry, believed to be late February, reads, "We'll leave at first light. 9 of us remain. We burn what we cannot carry. We tell ourselves we'll reach Mill Creek in 10 days if we keep a steady pace. We tell ourselves daylight is safe. We tell ourselves many things. What happened during those missing 2 weeks in February? The journal offers no answers. Later testimonies from the survivors are inconsistent, fragmented, and often incoherent. The only other surviving document from that period was a torn fragment of what appears to be Benjamin Lewis's personal diary, recovered among his belongings when the 9 survivors staggered back to Mill Creek. It contains just 3 entries, undated. The singing comes from beyond the ridge now. Mitchell says it's coming from the cave, but there is no cave. Mitchell is not well. None of us are well. Reed says they're closer now. Says they wear our missing friends' faces like masks. Says he can see what's behind the masks when they blink. That's what Reed whispered. He wouldn't explain what he saw. Holcomb ordered silence, said speaking of it gave it power. But silence offered no protection. By then only 19 men remained, and Holcomb noted bitterly, "Tomorrow there will be fewer." The survivors, 9 in all, finally emerged from the forest on March 12, 1883, but they did not return as a group. They drifted back into Mill Creek separately, one after another, as if even in survival they could not bear to remain together. Reed and Miller stumbled into town just after dawn. Winston and Thompson followed around midday. Others straggled in before nightfall, with Holcomb himself arriving last, alone, as darkness settled over the valley. Physically they were weakened but not broken. Exposure, malnutrition, and exhaustion showed in their gaunt faces, but there were no frostbitten limbs, no wounds, no visible injuries that could explain the loss of 18 men. Their minds, however, told a different story. The Mill Creek Gazette of March 14th reported, "The men appear greatly altered from when they departed some 3 months past. They start at sudden sounds. They avoid direct gaze. They speak little. And when pressed for details of their expedition, they provide accounts so varied as to suggest either deliberate concealment or confusion brought on by their ordeal." Their testimonies were a tangle of contradictions. Reed insisted the group had been scattered during a blizzard. Miller swore there had been no blizzard, only an attack by a mysterious mountain tribe. Winston and Thompson said nothing at all. Others gave stories that clashed with one another and with known facts. Only one detail remained consistent. 18 men had perished. How, where, and why, no one agreed. The uncertainty drew the attention of territorial authorities. Concerned about foul play, the governor ordered an inquiry. The man assigned was Sheriff James Blackwood, grandfather of Theodore Blackwood, who decades later would reopen the case. Sheriff Blackwood's surviving report reads, "While inconsistencies in their accounts raise suspicion, no physical evidence of wrongdoing is present. The men appear traumatized, not guilty. I recommend medical care over criminal charges." Doctors who examined the survivors observed disturbing symptoms. Martin Whittaker's notes describe them as extremely averse to darkness, insist on lamps burning through the night, show disproportionate terror at certain sounds, wind in the trees, distant animal calls. Several report the identical nightmare. being summoned into the forest by familiar voices. Despite their reluctance, the survivors were ordered to guide a recovery expedition back to the camp. On March 20th, Lewis and Fletcher led a small detachment into the mountains. Yet both men became strangely disoriented in terrain they had once traveled with precision. After 10 fruitless days, the team returned empty-handed. The Mill Creek Gazette wrote on April 2nd, "Were our guides deliberately misleading the recovery team? If so, what horrors are they concealing? And if not, what power could so confound men who had only recently walked those same paths?" A second, larger recovery party set out in June 1883. This time, they succeeded in locating the camp, or what was left of it. The site was nothing more than charred ruins. The cabins had been burned, just as Holcomb's final journal entry described. Yet there were no bodies, no bones, no personal belongings, no clear signs of violence or struggle. The official report stated plainly, "Site appears hastily abandoned, but without evidence of attack or natural disaster." Fate of missing men remains unknown, but that report did not include everything. In the private journal of Alexander Reynolds, the team's cartographer, another discovery is recorded: found unusual cave formation roughly 1 mile north of the campsite. Entrance partly hidden by fallen timber. Interior walls marked with symbols unlike anything I have seen. Not Indian pictographs, not miners' symbols, not natural. Geometric shapes that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. The expedition leader ordered the cave sealed with dynamite after 2 members claimed to hear voices echoing from its depths. The blast was successful, collapsing the entrance completely. After giving their testimonies, the 9 survivors dispersed. Records suggest that most left Montana altogether. Augustus Reed relocated to Oregon, Samuel Perkins to California, and the others scattered across the country, severing all ties with one another. Jeremiah Holcomb lingered in Mill Creek for a short time before departing for Seattle in late 1883. His journal, carried out of the forest, was donated to the Territorial Archives under the condition it remain sealed for 75 years following his death. When it was finally opened in 1960, Holcomb had long been gone, dead by his own hand in 1885. The mystery might have faded into folklore were it not for Theodore Blackwood, a graduate student at the University of Washington. In 1962, while researching frontier settlements for his doctoral thesis, he stumbled across Holcomb's journal. Captivated, Blackwood devoted nearly a year to investigating the Blackwater Creek incident. His research notes, preserved in the university archives, show a meticulous pursuit of records, county documents, newspaper clippings, church register, and private correspondence connected to the survivors and their families. Most significantly, he conducted interviews with living descendants of the men who returned from the forest in 1883. These testimonies revealed unsettling consistencies. Martha Reed, granddaughter of Augustus, recalled that her grandfather refused ever to sleep in darkness and kept rifles loaded at every doorway and window until his death in 1884. Scarcely a year after coming back, William Perkins, grandson of Samuel, relayed family accounts of his grandfather's strange fits, periods when he swore that long, dead acquaintances were watching him from the shadows, their faces somehow ill-fitting, like masks that did not belong. Blackwood also discovered a grim pattern of the 9 survivors. 7 were dead within 2 years of their return, most by suicide or under circumstances that raised suspicion. Augustus Reed shot himself in October 1884. Samuel Perkins drowned in the Sacramento River in January 1885, though witnesses testified he had been an excellent swimmer. In March 1884, Thomas Fletcher was found hanged in his barn, his face twisted in what the coroner described as an expression of extraordinary terror. Only Jacob Miller and Isaac Thompson survived into old age, both retreating into seclusion. Miller died of natural causes in 1927 at 76, while Thompson outlived them all, passing in 1931 at 82. Among Thompson's personal papers, discovered after his death, his son Edward found a sealed envelope labeled, "To be burned unread upon my death." Edward honored his father's wishes not to open it, but he entrusted the letter to Blackwood, who convinced him of its historical significance. Inside was a chilling document dated January 3, 1930, in which Thompson declared himself the final living witness of Blackwater Creek. "I am the last to know the truth of what occurred in the winter of 1883. The account begins. With death near, I can no longer carry the weight of silence. Let this serve as both confession and warning." According to Thompson, the ordeal began earlier than Holcomb's journal suggested, not with Schmidt's disappearance, but with Reed's discovery. It was Reed who found the cave. Thompson wrote, its entrance half concealed by fallen timber. Inside, carved into the stone walls, were markings unlike any we had ever seen. They were not Indian nor miners' signs. They were older, beyond our understanding. Reed led several of the men to see it. Thompson continued. 7 of us entered with him. Holcomb refused, claiming his trapping lines needed checking. The markings extended deep into the mountain. Fletcher, who had some education, said they resembled no language but carried a kind of mathematical precision. Roberts noted that they seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, as though alive beneath our gaze. Deeper inside, the group discovered a vast chamber. The walls opened into a cavernous hall. At its center, a rectangular frame of stone standing upright on the floor. What Roberts called a doorway without a door. Beyond it, only the opposite wall of the chamber could be seen, yet the sight filled them with unease. The air shimmered around it. Thompson wrote, like heat rising off summer stone. What followed, according to Thompson, defies all rational explanation. Schmidt stood closest to the stone frame. Without touching it, he extended a hand, remarking on a cold draft seeping through its center. Then, as if intending to step around it, he instead passed directly through. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. No sound, no flash of light, simply gone, as though erased from existence. Panic erupted. The men fled the cave and returned to camp, recounting to Holcomb and the others what they had seen. Most dismissed the story as hysteria or an elaborate prank. Yet Cooper and Mitchell, convinced Schmidt was staging some kind of cruel joke, insisted on returning to the cave to investigate. They too vanished and were never seen again. From this point onward, Thompson's account grows increasingly unsettling. He describes how in the weeks that followed, men began disappearing not only from the cave, which they had sealed shut with felled timber, but from the camp itself. It happened in moments of solitude, a man stepping behind a cabin for privacy, or wandering to the edge of the clearing to relieve himself, and then simply failing to return. There were no tracks leading away, no signs of struggle. Even more chilling were the voices. We began to hear them after the first week, Thompson wrote. Familiar voices calling from the forest. Schmidt's voice, Cooper's voice. Each man who had disappeared calling to those who remained, pleading for help, begging to be let back inside the camp. Discipline became absolute. No one answered, no one ventured out after dark. Yet each night the voices crept closer, and each night they sounded less human. Most disturbing of all were the apparitions that began appearing at the edge of the firelight. They looked like the missing companions, same clothing, same faces, but something was wrong. Their proportions were subtly off. Their movements were either too fluid or too stiff. Their faces were blank, expressionless even as they called out in apparent distress. And when the firelight caught their eyes, it did not reflect red as an animal's might, but a deep, impenetrable black. By February, Thompson wrote, the survivors had fractured into factions. One group, led by Winston, urged abandoning the camp immediately. Another, under Roberts, argued they must search for and recover their missing companions. Holcomb maintained that they should hold out for better weather before attempting the return to civilization. The breaking point came when Roberts and his faction left the camp one morning, armed and determined to locate the vanished men. They were 15 when they left, Thompson recorded. By nightfall, none had returned. Throughout the afternoon the camp heard their screams, faint at first, then closer, then suddenly silenced. When darkness fell, 17 figures stood at the edge of the forest, their missing companions, Roberts among them, all standing motionless, all wearing the same empty expression. The 9 who ultimately survived fled the next morning, taking only minimal supplies and abandoning much of their equipment. Thompson's account becomes fragmented at this point, describing a frantic 10-day flight through the wilderness. We did not travel as a group, he wrote. That was our salvation. We scattered, each man following his own course, using the sun and stars to steer southeast toward Mill Creek. By day, the forest appeared merely a forest. By night, Thompson is never explicit about what pursued them. He only writes, they are not gone, they are never gone. They found a way through, and now they walk among us. They look like men, but they are not men, and they are spreading. The document ends with a cryptic warning. If you meet a man who casts no shadow at noon, who does not blink in a strong wind, who speaks your name as though tasting it for the first time, run. Do not look back. Do not answer when he calls. What wears his skin is not a man at all. Theodore Blackwood became convinced that, however distorted by time and trauma, Thompson's account contained a kernel of truth. Blackwood's notes suggest he became increasingly obsessed with verifying details of the Blackwater Creek accounts. He cross-checked geological surveys to confirm the presence of cave systems in the Bitterroot Range. He interviewed elderly residents about regional folklore predating the 1883 expedition. He even compiled a record of unexplained disappearances in the mountains stretching back to the earliest European explorations. Most troubling of all, Blackwood attempted to trace the descendants of the 18 men listed as lost in Holcombe's expedition. He found nothing: no death certificates, no estate records, no mentions in family Bibles or church registries. It was as if those men had never existed outside their names on the expedition roster. His faculty advisor, Professor Lawrence Merritt, grew increasingly alarmed by Blackwood's behavior. In a letter to the department chair dated May 12, 1963, Merritt wrote, "Blackwood has abandoned any pretense of academic detachment. He speaks of the Blackwater incident as if it were still happening, rather than something that occurred 80 years ago. He reports strange noises outside his apartment at night. He now carries a sidearm, claiming it is loaded with silver bullets. I fear he is not well. I recommend a leave of absence." Before the university could act, Blackwood abruptly left Seattle for Montana. His last known communication was a postcard sent to Merritt on June 7, 1963. "Living tomorrow for the Bitterroot Range. Have coordinates for the camp. Will verify Thompson's account directly. If I do not return by July 1, notify the sheriff in Missoula." University travel records confirm he departed Seattle on June 8. He never returned. 3 weeks later, a search party located his abandoned campsite. His journals and research materials, including Thompson's account, were recovered intact. Blackwood himself was never found. By September, the University of Washington officially closed his case, listing him as missing, presumed deceased, accident. For a time, his research was boxed away in departmental archives, forgotten until 1968, when Professor Marion Leach stumbled across it while cataloging old records. Unlike Blackwood, Leach avoided the field entirely, focusing instead on historical documents and oral accounts from Bitterroot residents. What she uncovered was chilling. Disappearances in the Blackwater Creek region stretched back long before Holcombe's expedition. French trappers in the 1820s had called it La Forte qui prend, the forest that takes. Native oral traditions spoke of a thin place, a boundary between worlds that could open under certain conditions. Most disturbingly, Leach discovered that the 9 survivors of 1883 were not the only ones who came out of those woods. Between March and October of that same year, 11 strangers appeared in scattered Montana settlements. Men with no history in the region. Men who offered no explanation for their origins. Men whose behavior unsettled those around them. Territorial records describe them in unsettling detail. John Smith, a name almost certainly false, surfaced in Helena in April. Police reports noted his flat monotone and habit of standing motionless for hours. Arrested for vagrancy, he later escaped custody, no further record. Thomas Green appeared in Butte that May, establishing himself as a barber. Customers remarked that he rarely blinked and seemed to breathe only when speaking. By October, his shop was abandoned. He was never seen again. William Jones took a position as a schoolteacher near present-day Missoula in September. School records describe his eerie stillness and the way he silently watched children during lessons. Parents complained of their children's nightmares. Soon after, Jones vanished without trace. The pattern repeated itself: sudden appearances, unnatural behaviors, brief integration into frontier communities, then disappearance. Leach found similar cases across neighboring territories in the following years, suggesting something had dispersed outward from Blackwater. Her findings culminated in a monograph titled Echoes from Blackwater: Displacement and Identity in Frontier Catastrophe. The university, however, declined to publish it, dismissing her conclusions as methodologically unsound. Leach resigned her post at the university in 1969. Her later whereabouts remain unknown. The last item connected to the Blackwater Creek incident in the University of Washington's archives is a letter from Edward Thompson, son of survivor Isaac Thompson, addressed to Professor Leach and dated July of that year. It reads in part, "Your questions about my father's account have caused me considerable distress. I had hoped the document would remain unread, as he wished. Now that its contents are known, I feel compelled to add one detail. In his final years, my father became convinced he was being watched. He installed locks on every door and window. He refused to leave the house after sunset. The night before his death, he called me to his bedside and said, "They've found me at last. The ones who took Schmidt and the others. They still wear their faces, even after 50 years. I dismissed it as the rambling of a dying man. Now, after reading your summary of his writings, I am less certain. Last week, I saw a man standing across the street from my home. He remained motionless for hours, watching my house. When a neighbor approached, he gave his name as Peter Schmidt, one of the men who vanished in 1883. The neighbor thought nothing of it, but I remembered my father's stories. I'm leaving town tomorrow. My advice: abandon this line of research. Over time, the Blackwater Creek incident faded from public memory. The area was folded into national forest lands in the early 20th century, and modern maps no longer mark the name Blackwater Creek. The exact location of Holcomb's hunting camp and the cave described in Thompson's writings remains unknown, yet scattered reports continue to surface echoing the original story. In 1922, a 5-man lumber surveying team disappeared while assessing timber resources. In 1947, 3 hikers vanished from a marked trail, their equipment neatly arranged beside the path. In 1958, a family of 4 went missing on a camping trip. Their vehicle was discovered with a flat tire at a Forest Service road turnout. Internal Forest Service documents from the 1940s through the 1960s describe unusual animal behavior in the region, birds falling silent mid-song, game animals abandoning traditional ranges, predators avoiding specific areas without clear reason. Rangers frequently requested transfers from the district. Several reported hearing voices in the woods at dusk. Officially, these accounts were dismissed as stress or isolation. In 1965, a geological survey conducted as part of a broader resource assessment included a peculiar footnote: anomalous acoustic properties observed in Sector G7. Sound appears to reflect in unpredictable patterns, creating the impression of voices where none exist. Recommend further study by qualified acoustic specialists. No such study was ever carried out. 2 years later, an internal memo from the U.S. Forest Service's regional office referenced unauthorized excavation in the same area, evidence of recent digging discovered by a ranger patrol, apparently an attempt to reach a cave system. No permits had been issued for geological or archaeological exploration. Increased patrols were recommended, but subsequent reports show no suspects were ever identified. What truly befell the 18 men who vanished from the Blackwater Creek hunting camp in 1883? The official explanation, harsh weather or conflict with native tribes, satisfies only the most cursory inquiry. The survivors' contradictory accounts suggest a deliberate effort to obscure the truth. Thompson's narrative, while potentially colored by trauma, mirrors regional legends and later incidents too closely to dismiss outright. Perhaps most disturbing is the implication in Thompson's final writings that whatever the men encountered in that forest did not stay there. His claim that they are spreading points to something not confined to a remote wilderness but potentially moving outward. They look like men, but they are not men, he wrote, a warning, a delusion, or the first documented sign of an ongoing infiltration, and one final document remains. In 1967, during routine maintenance at the Montana Historical Society archives, a staff member uncovered a previously uncatalogued letter, apparently written by Jeremiah Holcomb shortly before his death in 1885. Addressed to the territorial governor but never delivered. The letter contains a single haunting paragraph: "I write not to confess but to warn. We brought something back with us, not in our hands or in our packs, but in our minds. A door once opened cannot be fully closed. They watch me even now as I write these words. They wear familiar faces: Schmidt, Cooper, Roberts, and the others. They linger at the edges of my sight, patient and expectant. They know I will join them soon. But before I do, hear this. They are no longer bound to the forest. They walk the streets of your towns. They sit in your churches and your council meetings. They may wear the faces of those you once trusted. Trust nothing. Trust no one. The door stands open, and more continue to come through." At the time, the letter was filed away and dismissed as the ravings of a man in decline. Yet, when considered alongside Thompson's account and the patterns later noted by Blackwood and Leach, its words take on a far more unsettling weight. In 1968, a disturbing incident unfolded in Seattle. Police records describe the arrest of a man identified as Theodore Blackwood for disturbing the peace. According to the arresting officer's report, subject was accosting pedestrians, claiming to have returned from Montana after 5 years in the forest. Subject appeared disoriented and malnourished, clothing tattered yet paradoxically clean, as if recently donned. When questioned, subject became agitated, insisting, "I am not Blackwood. Blackwood is gone." The man was transferred to Western State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. Records show he was released after only 3 days, deemed no danger to himself or others. But the physician's notes are telling. Patient demonstrates unusual speech patterns, often pausing mid-sentence as if listening to unheard voices. Maintains a fixed, unblinking stare for uncomfortable durations. Identifies as Theodore Blackwood, yet displays no knowledge of his academic work or personal life. After his release, the man vanished. University records contain no trace of further contact. When interviewed in 1970, Blackwood's family confirmed they had heard nothing from him since his disappearance in 1963. Over the next several years, local newspapers in Seattle occasionally reported sightings of a gaunt man resembling Blackwood. In 1971, the Seattle Times ran a brief article titled, "Missing Professor Spotted Downtown." The report described a thin man in outdated clothing, seen standing motionless for hours outside the University of Washington library. By the time campus security arrived, he was gone. The forest remains. Blackwater Creek, though renamed, still runs, its waters feeding into the wilderness. The cave, if it exists, has never been officially located. 27 men entered those woods in December of 1882, only 9 returned. What happened to the others, and what might have come back in their place, endures as one of the darkest, most unsettling mysteries of the American frontier. In 1972, Park Ranger David Corbin filed an unusual incident report while patrolling what is now the Lolo National Forest, the area believed to encompass the site of the Blackwater camp. Corbin described encountering an elderly man in worn, outdated clothing at a remote trailhead. The stranger identified himself as Peter Schmidt, claiming he was waiting for my companions to return from their trap lines. Though when Corbin informed him that trapping was prohibited within the forest, the man reportedly smiled and replied, "The forest has its own rules." As Corbin reached for his radio, the man vanished. A search of the area revealed no tracks leading away from the site. Corbin's report ends with a personal note. Corbin's official report concluded with an unsettling observation. Subject's manner was deeply disturbing. Maintained fixed eye contact without blinking, spoke in a flat monotone. Skin appeared waxy, almost artificial under flashlight. Request permission to avoid solo patrols in this sector. Permission was granted and Corbin was reassigned. By the following year, he had transferred to Yellowstone National Park, but similar reports continued to surface. In 1985, a hunting party described encountering several men standing motionless among the trees at dusk. They appeared dressed like 19th century trappers, silent and watchful. When the hunters approached, the figures retreated into the forest, moving with uncanny speed and coordination. Spooked horses forced the hunters to cut their trip short. Nearly a decade later, in 1994, a group of college students hiking for the weekend reported hearing disembodied voices calling from the tree line near sunset. One student separated from the group to investigate and never returned that night. Search and rescue located him 2 days later, disoriented and suffering from exposure, with no memory of where he had been. According to the incident report, during recovery he repeated a single phrase, "They wear familiar faces, but they are not who they appear to be." The most disturbing discovery came in 2002. During the construction of a new fire access road, workers unearthed the remains of a cabin foundation nearly 10 miles from the nearest recorded settlement. Archaeological analysis dated the structure to the late 19th century. Among the artifacts recovered was a single metal button engraved with the initials PS, a possible connection to Peter Schmidt, one of the men lost in 1883. The report noted the cabin showed clear evidence of having been deliberately burned from the inside. In the decades since Blackwood's disappearance, the Bitterroot Range has been thoroughly mapped. Its forests have been logged and replanted, its wildlife monitored, its waterways charted. Yet stories persist. Local guides warn visitors not to camp along certain unnamed streams. Forest Service employees cycle out of the district faster than incomparable postings. Hikers still report strange encounters, voices that sound familiar yet come from nowhere, or figures glimpsed among the trees, moving in ways that seem almost human but not quite. In 2013, Documentary filmmaker Rachel Carter began investigating the Blackwater Creek incident for a proposed series on unsolved historical mysteries. Her notes reveal a meticulous approach, interviews with historians, examination of archives, and scouting trips into the Lolo National Forest. Her final email, dated September 18, 2013, reads, "Think I've located the actual site of the Blackwater camp. Matches Holcomb's descriptions perfectly. Planning final scout tomorrow with a local guide. If it checks out, we'll start filming next week." Carter never returned. Her rental car was later found locked at a trailhead parking lot. Her camera equipment was missing. The guide she had arranged to meet claimed she never showed. Search operations lasted 2 weeks before being halted by early snowfall. When they resumed the following spring, no trace of Carter was recovered. 3 months later, a strange video appeared on her professional YouTube channel. The shaky footage, filmed at dusk, shows a heavily wooded clearing. A woman's voice, believed to be Carter's, narrates, "Day 3 of solo search. I think I found it." These foundations match Holcomb's descriptions perfectly. The camera pans over moss-covered stonework. Then her voice continues, "There's something else here. Some kind of structure that doesn't appear on any map." The lens shifts to reveal a rocky outcropping with what looks like a cave opening. The voice grows more excited. "This has to be it. The cave Thompson described, the one that was supposed to have collapsed in 1883. But here it is. I'm going to take a quick look inside." The footage darkens as the camera's built in, light flickers into the void beyond. Stone walls emerge from the darkness, etched with faint, shifting markings eerily consistent with Thompson's original descriptions. The narrator's voice drops to a whisper. "These markings, they seem to change when viewed from different angles, just like in Thompson's account." The camera moves deeper into the cave. Suddenly the footage lurches as if the operator has stumbled. For an instant, a rectangular, freestanding stone structure appears within the cavern's interior. The narrator audibly gasps. The camera drops, the frame settling on the rocky floor. Audio continues for another 30 seconds. Hurried footsteps, ragged breathing. A distant sound that might be voices, and then silence. The video cuts to 10 minutes of pure black screen. Subsequent analysis of the audio during that blacked-out period revealed faint, intermittent noises, occasional footfalls, faraway vocalizations described by experts as not clearly identifiable as human speech. In the final seconds, a whispered phrase can be heard, its meaning debated by listeners. The most widely accepted interpretation: "They're wearing our faces now." Within 24 hours, YouTube removed the video, citing disturbing content violations. Copies, however, remain in scattered corners of internet archives. Law enforcement investigated the upload, but could not determine who accessed Carter's account to post it. Her case remains officially open. The 9 survivors of Blackwater Creek appear to have carried something out of the wilderness with them. If not physical evidence, then a secret kept until their deaths. Whether that secret was merely the psychological toll of watching their companions vanish or something far darker may never be known. What is known is this: 27 men entered the forest, only 9 walked out. And in the years that followed, strange figures began appearing in settlements across the region. Men who resembled their lost companions but were subtly, disturbingly wrong in ways that defied easy description. In 2018, a hiker in a remote sector of the Lolo National Forest discovered a cairn-like stone arrangement. Beneath its central stone lay a corroded metal container. Inside was a deteriorated handwritten note. Most of the text was illegible from water damage, but several chilling phrases remained. "Found the cave again despite the collapse. They continue to come through. Wear our faces but cannot perfectly mimic. Must recognize them by their stillness. Their fixed gaze. I do not trust even familiar faces in the forest." The note was signed T.B., potentially Theodore Blackwood, though handwriting analysis was inconclusive. The location was approximately 15 miles from where Blackwood's own campsite had been discovered in 1963. The Forest Service employee who first examined the note requested a transfer the following week. In his exit interview, he stated only that he no longer felt comfortable working alone in that district. Pressed for details, he refused to elaborate, saying, "Some things are better left unspoken." In recent years, interest in the Blackwater Creek incident has surged among paranormal researchers and conspiracy theorists alike. Internet forums now contain hundreds of posts speculating on what became of the 18 missing men. Theories range from the ordinary, bear attacks, tribal conflicts, infighting, to the extraordinary alien abduction, interdimensional rifts, possession. Most unsettling of all are the claims of modern-day encounters. Since 2010, more than 30 separate online reports have described experiences in the Lolo National Forest echoing elements of the Blackwater Creek accounts. Disembodied voices calling from dense undergrowth, figures moving in ways that are almost but not quite human, men in outdated clothing standing motionless between the trees. While hoaxes and misperceptions can explain many of these accounts, their consistency with 19th century testimonies raises deeply troubling questions. In 2021, a small team from the University of Montana's anthropology department conducted a limited archaeological survey near the presumed Blackwater Creek campsite. Their preliminary findings noted evidence of 19th century human habitation consistent with a temporary encampment, multiple burned cabin foundations, but no human remains. The survey was terminated prematurely after several team members reported auditory hallucinations and severe psychological distress. Team leader Dr. Rebecca Stern later elaborated, "Something about that location affected my crew in ways I've never seen. 3 seasoned field researchers, all reporting the same symptoms, voices calling their names, fleeting figures at the edge of vision, and a profound, irrational dread." I've worked archaeological sites all over the world. Across North America, Dr. Rebecca Stern had spent more than 20 years working archaeological sites, yet nothing prepared her for what she and her team experienced at the Blackwater Creek location. "I've never seen anything like it," she later said. "We collected our samples and left. None of us would consider returning. Those samples included soil from the cabin foundations, fragments of burned timber, rusted metal objects, and pieces of stone taken from a nearby cave entrance. Preliminary analysis of the cave stone revealed unsettling anomalies, microscopic patterns that appeared to shift depending on the angle of observation. These findings matched both Thompson's account and Blackwood's notes. Further study was quietly halted after 2 laboratory technicians reported severe headaches and auditory hallucinations following extended exposure to the samples. The materials were sealed and locked away in university storage. Dr. Stern's formal request for a more comprehensive investigation was denied. The official reason given was budgetary constraints. Unofficially, colleagues whispered that administrators had been contacted by federal agencies with concerns about the site. The forest keeps its secrets. The door, once opened, remains ajar, and somewhere in the dense woods of the Bitterroot Range, the echo of what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883 continues to resonate. A warning unheeded, a mystery unsolved, a horror undimmed by the passage of time. In 2022, a hiker reported a strange encounter to Forest Service personnel. While resting at a remote stream crossing, he noticed a man in old-fashioned clothing standing motionless on the opposite bank. When approached, the man identified himself as Jeremiah Holcomb and said he was waiting for my men to return from their trapping lines. The hiker, unaware of the historical significance of the name, thought little of it until mentioning the encounter to a ranger, who recognized the name immediately. A subsequent search found no footprints, no evidence of another person's presence. The ranger's report concluded possible mistaken identity or fabrication. Alternatively, the witness may have encountered someone engaged in historical reenactment. No further action was taken. The report was filed and forgotten, but the questions remain. What if the 18 men who vanished in 1883 never truly left the forest? What if whatever replaced them continues to exist, wearing borrowed faces, mimicking human behavior just well enough to pass casual inspection? What if Thompson's warning, "They look like men, but they are not men," was not the delusion of a traumatized mind, but a desperate truth? The Blackwater Creek incident offers no definitive answers, only unsettling possibilities. In the absence of conclusive evidence, each of us must decide how much credence to give to the testimonies of shattered survivors, obsessed researchers, and modern-day witnesses. Perhaps the explanation is mundane: the psychological toll of isolation, the unreliability of historical records, the human tendency to impose patterns and meaning on coincidence. Or perhaps something truly inexplicable occurred in those woods, something that continues to ripple outward through time, touching lives far removed from the original event. Perhaps the door Thompson described remains open, a passage between worlds that was never successfully closed. Listen carefully in the silence between heartbeats. Their voices might be calling your name, and if you hear them, If you feel yourself drawn toward the dense shadows beneath ancient trees, remember Thompson's final warning. If you encounter a man who does not cast a shadow at noon, who does not blink in strong wind, who speaks your name as if tasting it for the first time, run. Do not look back. Do not answer when he calls after you. What wears his skin is not a man at all. For the 27 men who entered the Montana wilderness in 1883, what began as a routine expedition ended in mystery and horror. Only 9 returned, forever changed by what they had witnessed. The other 18 vanished into history, or perhaps into something far stranger. Their true fate remains unknown. A disturbing footnote in the chronicles of the American frontier. The forest remains. Blackwater Creek, though renamed, still flows. And somewhere in the dense woods of the Bitterroot Range, something watches and waits. Something that wears familiar faces. Something that calls with familiar voices. Something that crossed into our world through a door that should have remained closed. 27 men entered the forest in 1883. Only 9 walked out. The others, they may be closer than you think.